All right, folks. Looks like we have another movie review today. We're going to be doing Lauren Southern's Farmlands, which is a very well-produced movie. So a little bit about Lauren Southern. She's a right-wing figure, and she does some good work. I'm not really too familiar with other things. I think was she the one who went to Italy and like helped deport some people? Was that her?
Okay, she's generally just a YouTuber that makes like commentary videos, but she went on this trip with, I believe she went with Generation Identity, which is a right-wing activist group in Europe. But she went and stopped a bunch of like MGO boats or something. Like I am still kind of confused exactly what she did, but she has a video on it.
Yeah, well, she helped stop people from coming into the Italy illegally. But anyways, generally, she's done stuff like this, made YouTube videos. But this was just like by far, this is her like magnum opus, at least for right now. This was like a legit documentary. Like I'd expect to go and pay like $10 to use in the theater, or even like have it pop up on Netflix. But good luck getting leftist Netflix to host this content. But anyways, this was actually pretty good. I enjoyed watching it. It was very well produced. She went to South Africa and she did a probably one of the most unbiased views of South Africa since just about anyone. Because like most of the time it'll mostly be like complete leftist drivel, and it's just a great country, and the only people who complain about it are racists. Or it'll be like apartheid should have been going on until should be going on to this day. You get two general viewpoints, and the most common one to see is the leftist one, where they'll pretend there isn't an issue there, and that's why you don't see many like news media reports on it, because it's kind of the situation right now. It's pretty bad over there. I speak to a couple people from South Africa, fairly regularly, and it's generally one of those places you try to get out of. So I guess it's not as bad as Chernobyl, but you kind of want to get out of there.
It's like North Korea.
Especially if you're like, it's like Venezuela kind of, but for white people.
Yeah.
Like if you're white over there, and probably for the black people too, because like it's pretty bad right now. It's really not doing anyone any favors. Like just the amount of people who die over there, especially the farmers, which is what this is bringing up. Like at least for the white people, like there's just people dying all the time because there's like major violence issues in that country. It's always had a bit of a violent history, and she goes over the history at the beginning, talking about the their foundations from the VOC, like the 1600s, and then it goes into some of the more modern stuff like Battle of Blood River, and that's where they kind of were they're like a group of people, the Boer people. They were like kind of ambushed by some Vokes, the Zulus, and they kind of lied to them. They just like massacred them, and they at the Battle of Blood River, they kind of had their like, it was almost like the Alamo, except for the Boer actually won, incredibly large. I think like one guy got injured or like died on their side, and they like just fended off like 20,000 Zulu warriors, and I think they killed like several thousand before they just headed for the hills. And that was basically South Africa for a little while, and then after that, they kind of got screwed over by the British during the Second Boer War, where they had the first concentration camps. They won't tell you that in history class. It was the British who were the first people with concentration camps. It depends on what you consider concentration camps, but I think they refer to it as concentration camps. It was basically a tactic to go and stop the Boer from having this sort of guerrilla warfare. And then the British took over until about I think it was 1948. And then after that, they had the South African government. They became independent. And then that's when apartheid happened. So from 48 to 94, there was some pretty strict rules against people who weren't white in there. And then, Nelson Mandela came over. And it was all peachy for the leftist media after that, except if you lived over there, you would see some very disturbing things, like there was a black economic empowerment, which is basically like diversity quotas, but like on steroids. Like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, this is like affirmative action times 2. Like, it's based on like they can't have more like white people than the population makeup of the country in a company. So like there's like I think 6 or 7% of white people make up South Africa's population. So like if you're, they can only hire that much if you want to have a government contract, I think. So it's kind of like really terrible, and that's why you see a lot of people go into farming
Yeah,
because
and the guy said, I think one of the farmers said that like he could only hire no more than 8% white people in his farm.
yeah, like it's pretty bad over there. And like generally, like if you go in the cities like Cape Town, yeah, Johannesburg, I think they like generally you're gonna want to have like a bodyguard with you, and like you have to have people like looking at your cars because like they'll be carjacked pretty fast over there. It's the entire world. It's just really sad. Like I think they described in the documentary, it was either documentary or some of the videos associated with it. She did some other ones beforehand where it was described as like you're living a room to room existence in that country. Like you have to go and have you don't really go outside all that much, like because you can't.
Yeah.
Like I guess if you're a farmer, you kind of have to, but you generally have weapons on you if you can get a hold of them, which it's pretty hard now because I think it was like 2001 or 2003 they made it so like it's really hard to get a gun license. Like back, I think it was like before then it was like somewhat closer to America, but now it's like probably closer to Europe. And in this country, if you don't have a gun, you have to go and resort to other methods to protect yourself, which suck, like using paintball guns, like no joke. They have like a paintball gun store that looks like a legit gun store in America because that's, that's what most people can afford.
Well, and also that paintball store was, she was describing how, some people would use paintball guns with like not really paint in them, like these sort of nylon balls as sort of a deterrent. They weren't even, some people weren't using bullets, but of course people did have guns with bullets. But that store was robbed, multiple times, and it was robbed like right after Lauren interviewed her. And so they had to shut down, and I think they moved out of the country too. But, you see that with a bunch of these cases where, like, I think the one farmer seemed to describe it best when, I think it was a he or she said, it's like the wild, wild west. Like, that's the impression I did get from this documentary, is that, South Africa right now is like the wild west in the farmlands especially. Like, it's not the far left idea of, oh, everything's peachy and nothing's, there's nothing wrong. And it's not really the far right idea where, like, it's a white genocide. And, it kind of is, like, Lauren in the beginning says, like, she was expecting to be somewhere in the middle. And it kind of is, but it's kind of, like, leaning toward that genocidal side. Like, it was a pretty unbiased view of it. It was, it was obviously, maybe you could argue, a little bit of a slant. But it was pretty unbiased. Like, she let the people speak and describe it for her. Like, she didn't inject her opinion in it. And it basically felt like, a crisis, I'd say. Like, that's the level I'd put this as, a crisis. Where there's, racism happening and all kinds of bad things. And, people were not only dealing with the crime, but also droughts that were happening for their farms. It's basically a sucky place to live. Like, that's how I wouldn't want to live there, to be honest. And, Lauren Southern reflected on that when she got home and said, it's a lot. I was kind of relieved to be home.
Well, yeah, like it's definitely, I think like maybe back in the 1800s, like pre-apartheid, I'd call it like more like the Wild West. Today, it's just like, I guess you could say it's like the Wild West, but it's worse.
Yeah.
Like, you can't even defend yourself. Like, at least for the Wild West, you could get guns to defend yourself. Like, over here, it's just like a losing battle. It's something's going to happen soon. It's going to be big. Like, they told them multiple times that if, like, you have another, like a protest the farmers they had, it was like Black Friday or something, or Black Monday or Thursday. It was some day of the week. And they had the protests then, and they said, "Oh, if you do this again, we can't be held responsible if there's like a civil war that breaks out."
Yeah.
It's like that level. Like, I have a feeling that within the next 5-10 years, if that, there is going to be a massive, either civil war, race war, something in South Africa. Especially if you look at the rhetoric that the people in power and the people like the politicians are using, like mostly like 100% on the, at least from what I've heard, on the left of their country, like the the black population, like a lot of their politicians. Like they had the one girl, like the one black girl, and she was saying it was really scary. Some of the stuff she was saying was like, "Oh, we're going to take these farmlands by force if necessary." And like she was saying, she wants to go and she was going to go and do it. Like they will do it. And another person says, "Oh, we'll change the law so we can go and take the land." Like it's just. And then they had, I think it was like Malema. It was one of the. Was it Julius Malema? It was one of the guys. Like they had a politician in there. He was, I think, president for a while. I think he may have just left. I forget his name, but this guy was a piece of work. This wasn't in the documentary, but I've seen like news articles where like he admitted to raping a girl because he was like, "Oh, it's okay because I'm a Zulu warrior." And she was wearing a short skirt. I couldn't help myself. And the girl had AIDS. And he said, "Oh, well, I took a bath afterwards to prevent AIDS."
Yeah, like, that makes everything better.
Yeah, this guy's so stupid. And there was another guy. I don't know if this was the same guy. It was like the president who couldn't even like count.
Yeah, I remember that.
On, I think Top Gear or the Grand Tour. Yeah, they had that. It's just like these are the people who are being elected over there. Like
that's pretty bad.
That's not okay to have in anything that wants to consider itself a relatively first world nation. Like it used to be a first world country, like back in the day. As terrible as it would sound during apartheid, they were a nuclear power. Most people don't want to talk about that, but they were a nuclear power, and they had, as terrible as it was for the black community, their standard of living was probably better than it was now. I'd ration to even say not that it was okay, but it was probably better than, they didn't have these sort of droughts from what I understand that they do now. Like they had a lot of sanctions. It was, they had a lot of requirements, but the amount of violence, I think they kept that in check, generally.
And what they were all saying in the documentary was that because those first two people she interviewed that were like crime scene investigator, kind of like CSI people, that not only these very brutal murders, but the numbers that the government gives out saying the crime rate is much lower than what they were believing it was. Like they think that the numbers are much higher. So not like a crazy amount higher, but higher than what the government says. So it sounds like there's just deep corruption just in the government alone. Because like you were mentioning, like there's like these land laws, so like they're trying to take the land, and a lot of these very radical extremist groups, like that one girl, which was a kind of a fringy group, but gaining some steam, and then the government's doing some of their stuff.
Yeah, look up the EFF, I believe that's the name of them. They're a growing political party, and they're starting to rival the ANC, and they demand the ability to go and take land without compensation. And if they do that, it's going to be another Zimbabwe situation. Like they did that in Zimbabwe. They took the land, and then a couple years later, you get what we got now, and it's like they have a bunch of these farms, and no one knows how to farm because they've never been taught.
Yeah, and then you don't have an economy. You don't have any resources.
Yeah, they used to be able to have farms. They have great mineral resources. They should be, a fairly wealthy country, but the politicians are so corrupt over there. Like I read another article. It was, I think, it was either Malema or whoever the other guy, or Zuma. That was his name. The guy who raped someone and admitted to it, and it's still in politics, to my knowledge. Like he got a giant swimming pool put into his house. And he was able to go and write it off because he said it was a fire suppression system.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and they didn't mention they didn't even mention that in the documentary. Like, there's just so much, and she did a good job given the amount of time it was. But like, you could make like multiple documentaries about how corrupt this place is.
Oh yeah.
And then like, it's not even just the white farmers too. Like, just in general, it's a terrible place to live, and the taxes over there, they're sky high because like, I think a lot of people don't work in that country, and like they end up like having to go and support them with a few people who do make money. The infrastructure is just god awful over there. Like, the roads are falling apart, the buildings, everything. Like I think pre-1994 never really got restored too well. So they're just kind of riding off that same thing that Zimbabwe did, after the fall of Rhodesia. They kind of just ran off of that old infrastructure. And that's what's going on right now. And it's honestly, as sad as it is to say, economically that country was probably better. Now there's an alternative that they could go and do that's neither of the two systems. I don't know what that alternative is, but they're going to have to go and work on it, because what they're doing right now is just going to involve, if they kick out all the white people, which they're some of the most well-educated people in that country, say whatever, you will. But if they end up kicking out every single white person from the country, they're not going to have nearly as many like engineers to go and fix things, which is right now what the problem is, because they can't employ them because of the black economic empowerment. They can't employ the engineers and the technicians and the scientists because most of them are not African. They're not black.
And what people are probably thinking right now is, like, with all this stuff we're listening of how bad it is and taxes and all that, you're probably thinking, why don't the farmers leave? Why don't they leave? Like, if it's so bad, well, some of them are leaving, but as they were saying in the documentary, it's very expensive to leave. And these people don't make a big living unless you're like these engineers that are basically keeping the economy like together somewhat. It's not like you can just pick up and leave. And that's like the case with a lot of countries, especially like South Africa. They just can't just leave. I mean, lots of people want to keep the South African culture and preserve it and all that. As they were kind of showing at the end there, some of the people that were saying why they didn't want to leave. But back to the, because I wanted to touch on the production values documentary. It was a very, very well produced documentary. For an hour long, a little over an hour long, hour and 15 minutes, free YouTube documentary created by an independent YouTuber, is impressive. I know she went with her friend Kaylin Robertson, who's a filmmaker and some of an activist who helps out with Tommy Robinson, his stuff. He did a majority of the filmmaking aspect of it and the editing of it, I believe. And, he's a very talented individual and did a great job. They shot on a bunch of DSLRs. It was well lit for the interviews. The drone shots were really cool, beautiful, showing the great scenery and all that. Those were, amazing. Color corrected very well. The graphics at the beginning part when they were talking about the history of the country, of how they sort of got to where they are now, was very well done. The graphics looked good. Everything was really well done, except a few little like production things that just kind of made it look a tiny bit unprofessional if you notice these things. Like, there was one part where she was interviewing this girl and they kind of left the mic on the table on like a glass, and like you saw the mic in the shot, and I was like, you could have moved that out of the shot. Like, I didn't really understand why that was there. That just doesn't look good. And there was like this black dot on the lens that was quite visible, for multiple shots, and I was like, usually just, you're not supposed to really see those sort of things, but that's minor stuff. Those are like little nitpicks, but other than that, like, it's just really well done. And you got to see multiple perspectives of the farmers and the murders that they've experienced of family members. But she also interviewed, like you said, the black politician that was kind of pro-government. And you also got the extremist group of that girl that was basically saying to take the land and not give them any compensation. And you had that guy at the end that was from like basically like an ethno state in South Africa that was talking about their area, the president of that area. So you got like all these different perspectives. And the farmers, two of them, or sorry, they weren't farmers. The two crime scene investigative people. And then, of course, the farmers. So you got like all these different perspectives, which is what journalists are supposed to do, and especially for a documentary. So she did her homework and she did her job well, like better than some other journalists out there. Like, she actually did journalism, being on the site in South Africa and doing this stuff. So I can't wait to see what more documentaries she produces, because this is her first one. It was already got 500,000 views and it's highly praised.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was very well done. There's a couple things, like you mentioned, I didn't really pick up on it, but all in all, I thought it was pretty good. Now, as for like what can they really do? Like outside of having a foreign assist, like foreign intervention in their government, which I think might have to happen. I have a feeling we're going to end up getting like a Hotel Rwanda sort of situation in there in a couple years if nothing changes, or if it just keeps going on this
Yeah,
current path, it probably will. Like, and the whole Orania, which was the ethno state, that's I think what might end up having to go and like become the new norm of that country if they want to go and like prosper, because there's so much like deep-seated hatred over there. I
yeah,
think like that seems like to be the only place where they don't have to worry about like being murdered for their their skin color. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but they did have like black homelands in that country, which were significantly larger than Arania, where no white people were allowed to live.
yeah, yeah,
So I think instead of like a rainbow nation, it's going to become more like a bunch of ethno states like broken up in there, and that's a sad thing.
yeah,
Maybe if things could have been done better, like if maybe they didn't have apartheid, things could have changed. But at this rate, you can't change the past, but
I
you can
think,
only
yeah, sorry.
you can only really change the future. And I don't really know any other way for like either that or just all the whites end up getting kicked out. And the only real place I know that's even accepting these refugees is Australia. Like I talked to someone who's South African. He's trying to go and leave, and his wife was like British, but the people, they were trying to go and like get him and his wife in there, and like they're being very condescending to him and accusing him of racism. But like that's not right either. So I think maybe if the United States offer to take some of these refugees, but we already have our hands full with immigration at the moment, so I don't know
Yeah.
what the right solution to this is.
Yeah, I think there's not really going to be a solution. I think what's probably going to happen, I don't think there's going to be a civil war. I think just the whites are going to leave. They're going to get enough money or something, and they're just going to leave one way or another. And the reason, like, if people are confused as to why we keep saying white and black and all about this, because it's not like America where things are divided among class or, political affiliation. In South Africa, it really is race is like the biggest divider, and there's still deep-seated racism between both sides. And what the problem is, like you were mentioning and the documentary shows, is there's literally a giant black ethno state where whites aren't allowed, and there's a white ethno state where blacks aren't allowed. And in between it is the farmlands and the cities and all this other stuff. It's just a big mess, and there's hatred on all these sides that I honestly don't know how you fix that. Because the government isn't helping in any way when their president was, I think it was the president, was doing that dance where he was chanting a song that said, like, death to whites or something. It's like, that's not building bridges. That's not helping people. And I honestly, like I said, I don't know how you fix it. I don't think you can or will. I think it's just going to get worse, and the whites are going to leave, and, you're going to end up with, whatever is left of it.
Yeah, I just think that their culture is probably end up being either destroyed or just transferred to whatever country they decide to all move to.
Yeah.
And the one thing I was kind of sad I didn't touch up on was I think I was reading a couple news articles, and there's been a lot of like influence from Asia within them like within South Africa recently. Like
Oh,
I know
really?
like there's a bunch of like politicians, from what I understand, who are of Indian descent who got like in some massive corruption scandal. I know it
Huh.
wasn't I guess she probably didn't talk about it because that it was about farmlands, but I think that maybe it's India and China. They might be starting to go and like look into almost colonizing South Africa because the whites are leaving, which is bringing up a whole new opportunity for other countries to go and invest into South Africa and take the rich, just like the amount of diamonds they have over there. If they like actually had access to all those without like De Beers and these other companies doing their thing, it
Hmm.
would devalue like diamonds to the point where they're nearly worthless. Like they have so many natural resources that aren't even being utilized right now. It's sad,
Oh, wow.
but yeah, I think that was last of my thoughts. Anything from you?
Last thing I'll say is that, I'll put the link to the documentary in the description in case any of you are interested in checking it out. It is definitely, I would say, worth watching. if you just want, if you don't know anything about South Africa in general or this situation, it educates you on that and gives, the multiple perspectives of what's happening now. And the documentary really doesn't take a side on anything, which is like I like, because Lauren is obviously a right wing, YouTuber, and it's just interesting, because not many people are talking about this. So I encourage anyone that's just interested in the South Africa farming crisis just to watch it, because the one thing I would say as a takeaway is definitely a crisis, and I definitely felt that more than ever watching what these families were going through. Like, it's a very dangerous country, and that's why you're seeing some of these like little militia groups form that like are housing lots of weapons because they fear a civil war. But personally, I don't think that's really going to happen. But regardless, I do, I was, reminds me why I'm very grateful, especially coming up in this 4th of July. Very grateful to be an American and live in such a safe, nice country, even though we have our problems. Because South Africa, man, it's a mess, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, but just one last thing, this really did show you that, was apartheid, that was terrible, but the current situation's bad too. I'm
Yep.
not really recommending one over the other. I think both of those were just bad, but the current
Yep.
situation cannot continue to exist as it does. But anyways, watch the movie, make your own opinions, but all in all, great documentary. Would recommend again.
Yep. Same here. Thanks everybody for tuning in to another Real Review. We'll be back again with another movie or documentary or whatever we watch. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys later.
See ya.